Mira didn't even feel the cup slip from her hand. It hit the tiled floor of Attorney Hallberg's office with a sharp crack, and coffee splattered across her shoes, but she stood frozen, pulse pounding in her ears as Hallberg repeated himself in that calm, professional tone. The entire estate, totaling $100 million, goes to Jonas and Lillian Calderon. The room felt suddenly smaller, choking, as if the walls had leaned in. Mira stared at the lawyer, waiting for some part of the sentence to change, waiting for a clause that included her name, anything that made sense of the moment. But nothing came. Only silence, and then laughter. Jonas's laughter. Loud, wheezing, greedy. Lillian clasped both hands over her mouth, tears bursting from her eyes. But they weren't the soft, grieving tears Mira expected from someone hearing the final words of a parent's will. These tears glittered with something sharp, something hungry. "Oh my God," Lillian gasped. "We're rich. We're finally, Jonas, do you understand? We're rich." Jonas grabbed her hands, spinning her around as if they were dancing in a ballroom instead of a lawyer's office. Mira stepped back, the force of their celebration pushing her out of the moment like she didn't belong in it at all. "Wait," she whispered, barely able to form the word. "What about Grandpa's instructions? He always said he wanted." Hallberg shook his head gently. "Miss Calderon, the will is clear. Everything was left to your parents. Everything." The word clanged in her ribs like a dropped iron bar. She didn't remember the rest of the meeting. Not the way her mother kept giggling. Not the way her father's hand shook signing the papers. Not the sound of the pen scratching across documents that redefined all their lives in seconds. But she remembered the exact moment they walked out the doors of Hallberg's office. Her parents stepped into the find. Hallway, taller, lighter, drunk on possibility. Mira followed behind them like a forgotten shadow, trailing the edges of their excitement. Jonas slapped his phone screen repeatedly. "I'm quitting today. Today, Lillian. Not tomorrow. Today." "Good," she said. "We're done living like nobodies. I'm getting the emerald necklace I showed you last week. And that white car, the one with the butterfly doors? Jonas, I'm getting it. I don't care how long the list is." Her voice rose in pitch with every sentence, and all Mira could think was, Grandpa didn't even like those things. He liked hiking boots and backyard tomatoes. He liked old radio shows and wooden puzzles. He liked giving Mira quarters to buy peppermint sticks after school. But he hadn't left her a single cent. Not even a note. Not even a reason. She followed her parents into the parking lot, feeling the world shift beneath her feet, like stepping onto a shaking bridge. "Mum," she said softly, almost, afraid of the answer. Can we talk about this? Just the three of us, please?" Lillian paused, turning with a look Mira didn't recognize. It wasn't anger. It wasn't confusion. It was superiority. "We'll talk later, Mira," she said, waving her off. "I'm too busy processing this blessing." Jonas had already unlocked the car. "Come on, Lil. We have celebrating to do." The doors slammed, the engine revved, and Mira stood in the parking lot alone. The celebration didn't stop that day. It didn't stop that week. It spread through their home like a fever. Expensive boxes piled up on the porch, shoes, bags, jewelry, tech, more clothes than Lillian could wear in a year. Mira walked around the house feeling like a stranger in a museum curated entirely by people she used to know. The first fight happened 3 days after the will reading. Mira stood in the kitchen fixing her lunch for work when her father pointed to her uniform polo and said, "You're still going to that library job?" "Really? We're a family of millionaires now, Mira. You make us look average." She froze, spoon mid-air. "It's my job, Dad." "It's embarrassing," he snapped. People will think we're struggling. Her mother chimed in from behind the counter, not even looking up from her phone. Try aiming higher, sweetheart. You can't keep living small. Living small, the words cut deeper than she expected. I love the archives, Mira said, voice barely above a whisper. You love low standards, Lillian said. That night, Mira sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall. She went through memory after memory every time she took care of them, every time she put her life on pause for them, every time she believed she mattered as their daughter. But something had shifted. She could feel it in every passing hour. Something unseen but unmistakable. Money had replaced her. 2 weeks later, Jonas and Lillian began house. Tours, mansions, estates, gated properties with marble fountains taller than their old home. They returned each time dripping with bragging rights and designer samples. One afternoon, Mira came home early from the archive's water leak, early closure, and noticed the front door was slightly open. She stepped inside cautiously. Boxes of her belongings were stacked in the living room. Her suitcase sat on the couch. A pile of her books was shoved in a trash bag. Her throat tightened. Mom, Dad. Lillian walked out from the hallway with her arms folded like she'd been waiting. You're home early. What's all this? Mira's voice wavered. Jonas joined them, hands in his pockets. We're listing the house, he said simply. We bought a new estate. It doesn't have room for you. Mira's heart stuttered. Room? What do you mean room? I live here. Not anymore, Lillian said, shrugging. You're an adult. You should be out there making something. Of yourself. We can't drag your dead weight into our new life. It's time. Dead weight? Mira repeated, breath cracking. After everything I've done for you, after Dad's accident, after I gave up my apartment after, Jonas frowned. Stop being dramatic. Collect your things. We need the place clean for photos tomorrow. Mira's vision blurred. Are you throwing me out? Lillian responded with a single, emotionless phrase that would replay in Mira's mind for months. This is what's best. Don't call us. A gust of wind slammed the front door shut behind Mira when she walked out carrying the only suitcase she could haul. She turned once, hoping for something. A sign. A second thought. A hesitation. But the curtains stayed still. Her parents didn't look through the window. They were done with her. By the time Mira collapsed into the driver's seat of her old car, her hands were shaking so hard she could barely fit the key into the ignition. She didn't cry at first. She just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, feeling like the world had dropped her off a cliff with no explanation. Then the tears came hard and fast, unstoppable, her forehead pressed against the wheel as if she could brace herself against the pain. She slept in the car that night, and the night after that, and the night after that. Mira woke to the thin light of dawn and the ache in her shoulders from sleeping half-curled on the passenger seat. The motel room smelled like bleach and old perfume. She wrapped her hands around the cheap ceramic mug the clerk had given her and tried to count the hours until her next overnight shift at the archives. Routine had always been a life raft. Now it was a plank. At the archives, she moved like a ghost among the stacks, fingers tracing the spines of books she'd catalogued 100 times. The regulars offered her polite smiles, unaware of the war she'd been pulled into. She signed for incoming. Donations with mechanical calm, shelved returned novels with practiced speed. Work kept panic at bay because panic wanted company. That afternoon, while she was drying a soaked box of her things under the bibliophile lamp, a patchwork of clothing and paper that smelled of mildew, she found the copy of The Glass Orchard. It was warped from water. The cover wanted to peel away like a scab. She pried it open to the dedication page, where Evelina had written a looping message when she'd handed Mira the book as a child. A small, metallic sound escaped the hollow spine when she fanned the pages. Her fingers closed around a cool, heavy thing. A key. Old but polished, where hands had rubbed it down over time. A folded scrap of paper tucked next to it bore Evelina's handwriting. Mira's breath hitched. The words were brief and precise. When the wolves show their teeth, Vault K 312. The code is the day I named you. The phrase, wolves show their teeth, landed like a bruise and warmed into a stubborn ember of hope. Evelina had always been more cautious than people assumed, softer in the ways that counted and shrewd where necessary. Mira's mind spun with questions, but the key felt like a rope thrown into a river she was determined to cross. That night, she took a bus into the city, with the key knotted in her palm. Brimwater Federal had granite floors and a security guard who looked bored until she explained she had a safety deposit box to open. The vault room smelled of metal and lemon cleaner. K312 was modest. Inside was a narrow brown package, wrapped in paper that smelled faintly of cedar, and a sleek black drive without markings. Evelina's letter inside was everything Mira had hoped, and a little more. It outlined a lifetime of careful observation. How Jonas and Lillian had always softened into small cruelties. How they'd made choices that favored image over substance. How Evelina had watched them get closer to wanting than being. She wrote that she had wanted to give money to those who could use it wisely, but she could not, in good conscience, leave a fortune to people who might spend it into ruin. Instead, she had left Mira a responsibility designs, patents, and whiteboard sketches for something Evelina believed could change communities. A HelioCore prototype that could harvest geothermal energy more efficiently and affordably than existing technologies. Mira sat on the bank bench and let the words settle like slow rain. She had studied environmental engineering in a part-time way years ago, scribbled formulas in margins of library notebooks, and helped in DIY science projects that lived and died on coffee and stubbornness. She hadn't been practicing. Her career had been quiet and honest. But here was something inherited that demanded action, not consumption. Evelina trusted her to steward it. On the bus ride home, Mira's hands trembled between clenching the drive and stroking the key. Ideas fired across her mind like sparks. A lab, a loan, a small team, a prototype. The plan felt both terrifying and inevitable. This was not the quick fix of a check. It was work that might take years. She welcomed the scope, something solid to do with all the bruised energy inside her. She found a small warehouse in an industrial strip that smelled of oil and old paint. The owner, a retired machinist, took her patent as collateral for a modest loan and let her sign a 1-year lease at a rate she could barely afford. The place had a single bare bulb in the middle and a stack of wooden pallets, but it was hers. The word felt like a bell in her chest. Her first hire was Rowan Vale, a former engineer who had been pushed out of a big firm for asking questions the executives didn't want asked. His hair was too long, and his cynicism thinly veiled a hunger for meaningful work. Petra Shaw arrived next, quiet, precise, with hands that spoke fluent tolerances and the kind of focus that made machines sigh into better behavior. Devon Marrow came last, a coder who preferred late nights and ramen and had fingers that danced over keyboards like a pianist. They were not glamorous hires. They were stubborn, and they were exactly who Mira needed. They started small, with Evelina's blueprints spread across a battered table. The first night they soldered until their eyes burned, connecting circuits and arguing gently over tolerances. Rowan scowled at a diagram. "This will overheat unless we improve the coolant matrix," he muttered, tapping the schematic. Petra nodded. "We can redesign the fins, but the casting will need to be precise. Devin, hunched over a laptop, grinned without looking up. I can simulate the thermal dynamics tonight. If we're lucky, we'll know within hours whether we're deluding ourselves. Failure arrived like punctual rent. The first prototype leaked, the second shorted. The third cracked along a seam that had shown no sign of stress in the simulations. They ate cold pizza and argued and rewired and patched. Some nights Mira wanted to give up, to tuck the drive into a box and pretend she'd never found it. But then Petra would show a thin smile when a component fit, or Rowan would curse and laugh in the same breath when a calculation worked, and Devin would high-five like they'd just launched a rocket. They learned to trust the rhythm of problem-solving, hypothesize, fail, adjust, repeat. The warehouse became a small ecosystem of creativity and grit. Mira learned to be decisive, to argue where it mattered and to listen where she needed expertise. Her leadership was not loud. It was a series of steady choices, staying when others wanted to leave, making coffee at 3 a.m, taking on the worst tasks so the team could preserve morale. Months passed in a series of compressed, brutal days. The prototype that finally hummed to life did so in an exhausted silence, as if the machines themselves exhaled. Mira watched the coolant flow, steady, and the readouts hold within expected tolerance. The first real pulse of HelioCore sent a soft, blue light across the metal bench like dawn through cracked blinds. Petra let out a sound that was almost a laugh, and Rowan slammed his palm to the table in triumph. Devin started recording specs and backups as if they'd caught lightning and needed to anchor it to paper. They kept the scope tight and the launch conservative proof of concept, not a world rollout. The demonstration they arranged at a local university drew a crowd of engineers, a few journalists from trade mags, and a handful of investors who had been sniffing for novelty. When HelioCore delivered a steady, clean flow of power from a cold test well, the room smelled of ozone and surprise. The applause that followed was not the celebrity thunder that ruins people. It was the sound of peers acknowledging a thing made right. The first articles trickled in. A local paper ran a piece with the headline, "From Archives to Energy Young Engineers Restart." A regional blog praised the prototype's promise, and a trade magazine called HelioCore a practical leap in geothermal design. Investors began to call in a patient, polite chorus. People wanted to know who had engineered the breakthrough. Mira's name reached her parents' ears through the old Drayton Falls grapevine long before she planned to tell them. When she read the first story, she felt a complicated twinge, pride braided with a hardened memory of their faces in the lawyer's office. She didn't want attention the way her parents wanted it. She didn't want ornaments or fast applause, but the validation of a community that understood the gravity of the work was a balm. For the first time in months, she slept without the tremble under her ribs. There was still a long road ahead. Scaling, regulation, funding each had teeth sharp enough to bite off ambitions. But for the first time since the will, Mira carried the future on her shoulders and felt, at last, the weight of it building something honest and wholly hers. Mira didn't tell Rowan, Petra, or Devin much about her family. They only knew the outline. She'd been pushed out, and she was trying to build something that mattered. They didn't press for details. They respected the space she built around herself, a boundary stitched from old wounds and new purpose. But the world has a way of dragging history back into view. As HelioCore gained momentum, invitations surged. Investors who once ignored her emails now sent elegantly worded proposals. Environmental groups asked for interviews. Universities asked her to speak. Mira remained cautious. She wasn't building a miracle. She was building responsibility, something her parents had thrown away like last year's decorations. And while her world rose, Jonas and Lillian's world began to crumble. It started with an investment dinner. Jonas had been invited by a man who called himself a silent shark, promising returns that would triple before the season changed. Jonas, who had always wanted shortcuts to respect, wrote checks he didn't read and signed documents he didn't understand. The money vanished within weeks. Lillian's shopping sprees grew frantic, desperate attempts to patch the sinking boat with glitter and silk. They bought a mansion, upstate marble floors, glass walls, a driveway long enough to lose a child in, and discovered too late that property taxes were a monster with an appetite. Bills stacked. Their new friends disappeared faster than soap bubbles. The luxury renovations stalled because the contractor fled the country. Then came the lawsuit from an investment club Jonas joined, claiming unpaid fees and fraudulent claims. They sold jewelry, then furniture, then cars. One morning, Lillian stood in the echoing mansion dining room, empty, stripped, hollow, and broke down, screaming that everything was supposed to last forever. Jonas didn't scream. He went quiet, dangerously quiet, like a man staring at the ruins of a dream built on paper. They spoke Mira's name for the first time in months. "Maybe she'll help us," Lillian whispered. Jonas didn't respond for a long time. Then finally, quietly, "We threw her out." "We had our reasons," Lillian snapped. "Do you even remember them?" he asked, voice cracking. Silence answered. 3 days later, Mira's receptionist called her from the lobby at HelioCore Labs. "There are 2 people asking for you," she said softly. "They say they're your parents." Mira froze. She had imagined this moment before, imagined anger, imagined disbelief, imagined maybe even satisfaction, but standing there in her office, she felt none of those things. She felt nothing. Still, she walked to the staircase overlooking the lobby. Jonas and Lillian stood there, small and shrunken, their clothes worn, their eyes tired. They didn't look like the glittering couple who had spun each other around the lawyer's office. They looked like people whose world had collapsed inward. Lillian saw her first. "Mira," she breathed, voice cracking. "Sweetheart, we need to talk." Jonas looked up, his voice strained. We're in trouble. We just need a little help. Just enough to get back on our feet." Mira walked down the stairs slowly. She didn't move with hostility, or anger, or pride. She moved with clarity, with boundaries, with self-respect etched into her spine like steel. "What exactly do you want from me?" she asked quietly. "Alone," Jonas said. "A place to stay, maybe some company contacts. You've built something incredible. We're proud of you." Proud. The word scraped her ribs. She looked from one to the other, and for the first time since being thrown out, she saw them without the fog of longing. No matter how much she had once believed they could be better, their love had always been conditional. Conditional on status. Conditional on appearances. Conditional on utility. They didn't come because they missed her. They came because they needed her. "I'm sorry for what you're going through," Mira said. "But I can't help you." Lillian flinched like the words were bullets. "You can't? Or you won't? There's a difference," Mira said. "But in this case, both." Jonas swallowed hard. "We're family." "Were," Mira corrected softly. "Family doesn't throw you out when you're inconvenient." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lecture. She didn't curse them or list every pain they caused. She simply told the truth, and the truth was enough. Lillian's face crumpled. Jonas looked away, ashamed. "We have nowhere else to go," he whispered. "You'll figure something out," Mira replied. "You always do when you want something badly enough." She stepped aside, not dramatically, not symbolically, not with flourish. just with the quiet certainty of someone who has finally stepped out of a cage. Her parents walked past her slowly, each step echoing with a mix of humiliation and regret. When the glass doors slid shut behind them, Mira exhaled the breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt necessary. That evening, Mira stood rooftop level outside the HelioCore balcony, looking over a skyline lit partly by her invention. Cars moved like silver threads. City lights shimmered in the dusk. She felt the wind pull through her hair and closed her eyes. Evelina would have loved this view. "Thank you," she whispered into the cold air, "for believing in me when no one else did." Her phone buzzed with more emails, investors, partners, news outlets. Mira smiled faintly. She wasn't chasing fame. She wasn't chasing wealth. She was building something real, something that would outlive her name. HelioCore wasn't just an invention. It was a reclamation. Her life wasn't shaped by the people who abandoned her, it was shaped by the resilience she forged afterward. The wolves had shown their teeth, just as Evelina warned. But Mira had not only survived them, she had outgrown them. Walking back inside, her team greeted her with updates, blueprints in hand, ideas firing off like sparks. Petra asked, "Everything okay?" Mira nodded. Everything is finally exactly where it should be. Later, as she reviewed projections for expansion, new wells, new cities, new possibilities, Mira felt something settle deep in her chest. Peace. Achievements could fade, money could evaporate, but peace earned, peace was indestructible. Her story wasn't about vengeance, it was about rebirth. She had lost a family, but gained a purpose. She had been thrown out, but landed on her own power. She had started with nothing, but built the very thing that changed everything. Before ending her night, Mira whispered softly, "If you're watching this, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment. Do you think Mira should have helped her parents, or was she right to walk away? Let me know what you think. It helps the channel grow and helps me tell more stories just like this." Mira turned off the light in her office, leaving HelioCore Labs glowing behind her like a promise renewed. She didn't look back. She didn't need to.